I'm joined by Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur. He's a well-known Air Force veteran and someone who's looked particularly closely at Air Force history. Abhijit Iyer-Mitra is a senior research fellow in the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. One of his tweets has gone viral where he has said that it was wrong for the Prime Minister to call what Indira Gandhi did a blunder. Abhijit, I'll quickly come to you first because I hear we might have a weak line with you, with your permission, Air Vice Marshal. Abhijit, explain to us why you think the Prime Minister shouldn't have highlighted what Indira Gandhi did as a blunder.
So Shiv, it's very clear. I think we've been very consistent about this position throughout, that sometimes when internal security situations flare up to a point, you have to use massive force. It isn't, I'm not getting into the politics of it. I'm just talking about the application of force out here. Now, remember what the situation in the ground in Aizawl was. The Mizo National Front had surrounded the whole of Aizawl. It had been completely cut off. The attempts at, resupplying Aizawl with the Mi-4s or the Mi-8s, I forget which one, at that time had failed because the Mizos were directing fairly accurate gunfire at those helicopters. And you had to soften them up using air power, which is what was done. Because remember, the Mizos were going around killing people on the ground. Government officials were being killed on the ground at that point of time, and something had to be done. It was an emergency situation. You could not land troops there because the same way they were shooting resupply helicopters, they were going to shoot down, troop helicopters as well. And that was a risk not worth taking. It was a proportionate action taken at the right time to safeguard the territorial integrity of India. And I don't understand how an action taken to safeguard the territorial integrity of India is a blunder.
Okay. Air Vice Marshal Bahadur, how do you see it? Because, looking at history is always a difficult proposition, especially through the prism of politics. The Air Force was carrying out orders at a very, very difficult time. India had been at war just a year before that as well. How do you see it, sir? Was it a difficult but necessary decision? Or, could Indira Gandhi have done it some other way?
Thank you, Shiv, for getting me in here. Staying clear of politics, as Abhijit rightly said, it's very clear that it was a situation that had to be handled decisively. The point is, let's go back a little beyond before 1962 also. I mean, we got independence in 47 with myriad problems on our head. Basically, economics, lack of money, the refugee crisis in the initial stages, etc., etc. But let's take ourselves back to the government of the 50s and the beginning of 60s. It was a huge ask. So let's not restrict just to 62. And thereafter 65 war.
Yes. And
in 65, the decade of the 60s, remember, we were living from, it was from ship to mouth. The PL-480, Shastriji actually asked for gold to finance arms purchases in 65 war and to get out of the economic situation. He asked that from the citizen. So in that condition, here was a declaration of independence and the hoisting of the flag, as you brought out in the history of that. A decisive action had to be taken. So on the 5th of March, actually first initially, five para, and I think 6, they were flown by Mi-4s from Kumbhigram towards Aizawl. The helicopters had to come back because they were shot up badly. They came back. And next day, thereafter, when they went in, and the Dakotas also went in to drop supplies and arms to the besieged garrison, they were escorted with Tufanis. And the Tufanis strapped the area around where the MNF posts were, and so did the hunters. So it was 29th Squadron from Tesco and 37th Squadron too, with the hunters that flew in. If the Prime Minister, or let's take it, the government of the day, had not taken that decision, then we would have been in big problems. And that lasted just 2 days incident. As far as we know, it was just 2 days, the 5th and 6th, and 7th onwards thereafter, since they dispersed into the hills, the army caught up, removed the insurgents from the posts, and the normal process of anti-insurgency started. So there was no choice, and it was good that point where the decision was taken.
So it was a correct decision being taken. Abhijit, I know, I don't want to get embroiled in all the politics of it, but, since it did come up as part of the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, there are those who will say that Indira Gandhi's decision and her action, was a symptom of the politics over the Northeast. And, many have also used the example of 1984, the Bhindranwale episode with Indira Gandhi as being a reference point, saying that, like later in 1984, when Indira Gandhi allowed the situation to get so bad that she finally had to take decisive action in the form of Operation Blue Star. Similarly, with the disclaimer that her government is only a few weeks old, etc., it was basically the same thing again, letting a situation get so bad that hard action is imposed on you.
I would disagree with that, Shiv, and I'll tell you why. So remember, in 1984, Bhindranwale was a creation of Indira Gandhi and Gyani Zail Singh. Both of them actively pushed Bhindranwale because they wanted to get votes away from the Akalis. That was a careful, calculated maneuver that had taken several years. What happened in Mizoram was a case of neglect, and it was spawned by something called the Mautam, which is the flowering, 50-year flowering of the bamboo. Now, bamboo flowers every 50 years out there as a self-defense mechanism. And what that leads to is because there's too much bamboo seed, there's a sprouting of a huge number of rats. Now, what happens is once the rats have finished eating the bamboo, they start eating all the grain and crop. This wasn't the first time. 58, 59 was when it happened. This wasn't the first time it had happened. You had a massive famine because of it in 1862. You had a massive famine because of it in 1911. So every 50 years, round about 50 years, it happens. And 65 was when the next Mautam, 58 was when the next Mautam happened. Now, when this Mautam happened, people died. Now, remember, like the Air Marshal said, we were desperate. We were living, at that time, in fact, this was one of the episodes that led to the Green Revolution, the urgency of the Green Revolution, which started in 1968 with the IR-8, with the improvised dwarf rice and things like that, that Norman Borlaug introduced. But this was one of the crucial factors. So what happened was, you were already living hand-to-mouth or ship-to-mouth, as the Air Marshal said. And on top of that, you had a rat plague. Now, our famine was because of inadequate production. What was happening here was that you had a rat infestation exacerbating the situation. In spite of that, to the government's credit, only 100 people, approximately 100 people died. Now, 100 people in terms of a famine isn't a particularly bad management of resources. Was it an optimal management of resources? No, but people tend to forget. In those days, we were a very, very poor country. We did not have money to spend on preemptive famine fighting and things like that. And also, we were living in a situation where we had fought two wars, 62 and 65, like the Air Marshal said, and the expenditure on the treasury had been massive. So, this wasn't so much a case of neglect at all. I would say it was generally, in terms of Indian neglect, this was one of the less neglected situations.
Very, very interesting perspective there. And, I expect nothing less from the both of you. Air Vice Marshal Bahadur, very, very final comment from you, running short of time. The Air Force is a supremely professional force, but through the benefit of time, hindsight, and, looking at these, these difficult times in the rearview mirror, are historians within the Air Force, veterans like you, conflicted about the use of air power against our own citizens? Because that's what this was finally technically. These were rebels, these were people who were killing other Indians, but is there a conflict in anyone's mind, sir?
No, because we are very sure of the government of the day, no matter which political party, that the political party takes all points into consideration before giving or passing an order to the armed forces. So, and any government, whichever party is in power, knows that it should use minimum, if not zero force against its own citizens.
Absolutely.
So if an order comes, the government has thought through this situation. Please remember, we have not used it in JNK, we have not used it in Naxal area, we have not used it in Assam, we have not used it in the other part of the Northeast, where insurgency to a certain extent is still on. And hence, what I feel is that there is no dichotomy or any doubt in any soldier, sailor or airman, That an order that comes is very legitimate, and the government has thought through everything.